It feels so good to be making a Dark Souls 3 video with actual footage. So about a month ago I put out a video talking in depth about everything I'd learned from playing the Gamescom demo of Dark Souls 3. I talked about how the game felt, the bosses, the enemies, the weapon arts, and now we finally have footage of that demo. 4 minutes of it, in fact, plus new info on magic, covenants, multiplayer, new game plus, and more, so let's dive into it. So if this is your first time seeing Dark Souls 3 gameplay, the first thing you'll probably notice is that a lot of these animations look really similar to those in Dark Souls 1, and they are really similar. In a sentence, what I've been saying lately is that it feels like the mechanics and the pacing of Dark Souls 1, but with the polish and the fluidity of Bloodborne. And Miyazaki confirms as much in an interview. He says that Bloodborne influenced a lot of the tuning and adjustments to Dark Souls 3, however, Bloodborne doesn't have that same role-playing element and the customization as Souls, so he says that the team will be focusing on those things for Dark Souls 3. But let's talk a little bit about the new features in this demo. It bears mentioning that this demo that you're seeing here is an updated version from 1 month ago. There are some new features we can talk about, like the mana bar, magic, and a cleric-style character who's featured towards the end. Dark Souls 3 still has a lot of development to go before its release date in April, so bear that in mind. But by now, you've probably noticed that there's a mana bar in the top left, just like in Demon Souls. In previous demos, this mana bar was a point system, and these points were consumed whenever you used a weapon art ability. Now, it's a mana bar, and both magic and weapon art attacks will consume it. If you don't know what weapon arts are, let me quickly explain. A weapon art is activated when you press L2, and it opens up a couple of new moves for your use, depending on the weapon that you're using. So the short sword's weapon art is a stanced weapon art. You hold L2, and your character goes into this stance. From here, you can press R1 to do a special uppercut, guard, break attack, or you can press R2 to do a charging stab attack. The Greatswords Weapon Art is a combo weapon art. You press L2 and your character slams the sword down vertically, but from there, you can press R2 to do a huge uppercut that launches the enemy into the air. There are also some weapon arts that simply activate when you press L2. For example, the scimitar does a spin attack, and the battle axe does a battle cry. And there's also the weapon art for this mace that's shown towards the end of this clip. Though we can't tell what's happening here from this short clip. It's possible that this weapon art made his next attack do more damage, but it's also possible that he didn't combo it properly. I might be able to try this out next time I get my hands on the game. If you have a weapon art shield, designated by this little sword symbol here, you can use a weapon art with L2 with the shield still equipped. If you have a Parry Shield, which is designated by this symbol, you simply parry when you press L2. And if you two-hand your weapon, you can use a weapon art regardless of what shield you have equipped. So that mana bar in the top left isn't just for casting spells, it's used for melee combat as well. Mana doesn't appear to replenish over time, but you can replenish it with a new type of Estus Flask, which I believe is called an Ash Estus Flask. It's visible in the bottom left, the little blue flask there. So now, when you're going through a level, you have to sparingly use your Estus Flask for health and your Ash Estus Flask for mana. So it's another layer on top of a system that was already a good system to begin with, so I can't imagine this being a bad thing. But let's move on to actual spells. As far as I know, we know of 6 spells so far. There's Soul Arrow, Soul Greatsword, and Soul Dart, which you can see here. For miracles, there's Lightning Spear, a healing spell, and Sacred Oath, which increases your attack and defense for a short while. Obviously there'll be more spells. In fact, in an interview with Game Informer, Miyazaki has stated that players will have more criteria to accurately choose the types of spells that will fit your tactics or your strategies. And while the spells that we've seen here are pretty standard, bear in mind we haven't heard much about what a weapon art for magic does, so I assume it's some way of deepening the magic system. Let's move on to some of the information revealed by Game Informer. First up is Covenants. Miyazaki mentions that he wants Covenants to be easier to understand. On this topic, he says that Covenants have always had separate rules depending on each of the Covenants, but this time we're thinking of maintaining a common rule across the Covenants regarding invasions and summoning. So, for example, I take this quote to mean that there could be one covenant item for everybody, regardless of your covenant, but the covenant you're in determines what this item does, like an invasion item that changes the type of enemy you invade based on your covenant. Next is something that I'm really excited about. For me, one of the best things about a Souls game is that thrill of being invaded and of invading somebody else, and it looks like these systems are going to be simplified, which means that these systems are going to become more popular. Miyazaki states that invasions and summoning will no longer be locked behind consumable items, which naturally will help invasions become more plentiful. He also states that soul memory is being removed, which is good, and they're also aiming for 6-person multiplayer functionality. Let's quickly talk about fast travel. Our players will now be able to fast travel from the very beginning of the game, since Miyazaki apparently liked the convenience that brought to Dark Souls 2. There has been no information on the rumoured mechanic where you can create your own bonfire via sacrifice, so we'll have to wait and see if that changes the pacing of the game if it does end up existing. But moving on, remember the Soul Vessel from Dark Souls 2? It was an item that allowed you to respecialize your character and put your soul level points in different categories. Apparently, it's returning for Dark Souls 3 in some form. Next is New Game Plus. One of the best things about Dark Souls 2 was New Game Plus, and the fact that it offered new enemies and new enemy placements and new experiences. Game Informer reveals that this system will be returning. However, bonfire ascetics that allow you to ascend an area to New Game Plus to farm certain enemies and face certain bosses again will not be returning. And next is durability. Miyazaki mentions that he's still tuning the balance on durability, and he wants weapons to break more slowly than in Dark Souls 2, but faster than in Dark Souls 1, so somewhere in the middle. And finally, hidden walls are returning, and unlike in Dark Souls 2, you have to actually hit the hidden wall to unveil it. And before you go, I want to let you know one more thing. I'm going to be playing the TGS demo tomorrow, or maybe today by the time this video is released, and I'm definitely going to learn more about the demo. So I'll be putting this new information in the top line of the description and also on Twitter. So if you're watching this on the day it came out, then follow me on Twitter so you don't have to miss anything. But if you're not following, it's probably just in the first line of the description. I don't anticipate that I'll be able to learn too much more from playing the updated demo, but I'll definitely learn more about weapons and a couple of new spells, so that'll be cool. But thanks for watching, guys. I gotta say, I'm really excited for Dark Souls 3, just because it'll bring the community back together, which is a nice thing, and it's sounding pretty good so far, so let me know what you think in the comments. I still read them all, so don't leave that box empty, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.